Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Pit Talk, Pulling Pits and Opinions with your host, Gunny G, where service members help service members, period. Follow, like, subscribe everywhere you get your podcasts and on most social media platforms. Let us know how we're doing. Any criticism is good criticism. Let's get into it. We got a special guest before we get there and before he introduces himself. Thank you for the follows. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for the subscribes. I appreciate it. Much love going out to all my listeners and followers. Thank you very much. We have a special guest by the name of William J. Williams, retired Gunnery Sergeant, Marine Corps. Hey, Brad, go ahead and say hello.
Hello.
Hey, where are you calling in from? The guns, and give me a brief, not a brief, but a bio, where you were stationed at, your duty stations, billets that you held, things of that nature, when you came in, when you retired, all that good stuff.
Okay, well, I'm calling from Conroe, Texas, southeast Texas, about 50 miles north of Houston. And I hope that you don't mind the fact that I got my Gunnery Sergeant rank in the reserves. I was active duty from 1966 to 1970.
My goodness.
I was in Vietnam in 1968, which of course was the worst year of the war.
Yeah.
5,200 Marines got killed in Vietnam in 68, including a number of my friends. I was a radar technician on F-4s, and it's interesting the way the Marine Corps works is that I was trained as an infantryman, like everybody else in those days, and also spent a year in technical school learning to work on Phantom jets. And then, of course, I have every set of original orders in my Marine Corps book over here on my shelf. And I got orders. I went to Okinawa and got orders to the 3rd Marine Division as a rifleman. And then they canceled those after a few days, and I ended up working in a fighter squadron in Da Nang in Vietnam. Because of all of the training I got in the Marine Corps, including discipline, which I had never had before in my life, I was out of the Marine Corps 9 days and went back to college at the University of Alabama and received an electrical engineering degree. And they never covered anything in college that we hadn't already covered in the Marine Corps schools. Well, they were Navy while I was in the Marine Corps. And then after being out 9 years, I missed being around Marines. And just before I got too old, I went back in the reserve and was the communications chief for the 1st Battalion, H&S Company of 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines in Houston. And that plaque you see, the Marine Corps emblem over there, is I was fortunate enough to be Marine of the Year in that unit.
Correct.
In the 2nd year I was there with them. And I would, as jobs and stuff came and went, I changed back and forth. I got out of active duty as a buck sergeant, E5. Made staff sergeant in the 1st Battalion, 23rd Marines, and then was in active and inactive reserve for years, and actually finally made Gunny in 1990.
Wow.
And so I didn't get it. My handle is Gunny retired. I am retired, and I was a Gunny, but I don't get retirement from the Marine Corps. I had 18 years total service.
What?
Yeah, and it got to the point where my civilian job was eating up too much stuff. So I said, I made Gunny. That's enough of a goal for me.
Yeah.
That's, it's a title I can have for the rest of my life, and that's just fine. So
Yeah. That's crazy. 18 years. 2 more.
Yep. 2 more. Yeah. Yeah. But it would, anyway, I was the comm chief. The last reserve unit I was with was Brigade Service Support Group 2 in Atlanta. And I was the operations chief for the BSSG 2.
Wow. That's crazy. I gotta ask. So the civilian job was getting too heavy, or it was kind of rolling into the reserve life? Is that why you got out, or it didn't jive? They didn't jive together.
In my civilian job, I was making the same thing as a 4-star general in the Army, in the Marine.
Oh, that makes sense.
And I was a Gunnery Sergeant. So it was good for me. It kept me grounded. But on the other hand, when you looked at what it benefited me being 2 weeks in the summer and we won a weekend a month in the reserves. It didn't really make much economic sense
Right.
for me to continue that.
That makes sense.
And I did it anyway. My decision, I sometimes wonder about it, but I got put in for warrant officer that year.
Huh.
And if I had picked up warrant officer, I probably would have stayed.
Yeah.
But that's not a pretty story.
No. I mean, if you want to touch on it, by all means, guns, hit it. But before you get there, let me ask. Yeah, that doesn't make much economic sense to keep going 1 week in a month, 2 weeks out of the year. There's really no comparison. It's like comparing night and day. There's really none. But any rate, thank you for your service.
Not
Yeah, my honor and my pleasure to speak to you and learn from you and what you went through, and allow young service members my age and my culture, in this generation, what it took, what it took for Marines in your generation, in your culture, to excel and to just set the example, right? So that others can emulate, which is, we're just trying to live up to the hype that you guys, the bar that you guys set, excuse me. I got to ask, were you married at the time? Were you married while you were in active duty or reserves?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have any kids?
I had a daughter who served in the Navy on the Boxer.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And she's buried in the National Cemetery.
Very well. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
To hear that. It's never.
Got 2 grands.
Go ahead.
She had 2 grandsons that my wife and I raised.
Well, I am sorry to hear that. I not from experience, but I hear that most parents don't like burying their kids before they go. It's not a good feeling. But I'm sure she did her time honorably, and I'm sure she's got a good legacy to her kids, their kids, your kids, right? Got a good legacy to look back at. That's good. So I'm sorry to hear, but yeah, that's all I can say, really, Guns.
Yep. Life happens.
Yeah, it's true. Very true. It's good that you're still here to tell her story. You know what I mean? Let me ask you, in your time in Vietnam, were you mentally prepared, or were you kind of just, here you go, thrown to the wolves, figure it out?
It's funny, if you look back on my timeline on Twitter or X, you'll see that one of the things that freaked me out in preparing to go to Vietnam was having to get inoculated against the bubonic plague.
That makes sense.
I still have my shot card, and shows that I don't have to worry about the plague. But it's funny, I had a good Army veteran friend that argued with me. I was just out of school and was stationed in South Carolina. And a friend of mine, this is in 1967, and a friend of mine who was married got orders to Vietnam. Well, at the time, I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years. The tour in Vietnam was 13 months, or basically a year. And so, not being a great math genius, I decided, I'm going to go to Vietnam anyway. So why not now? So I actually volunteered to take his orders. And so I only had 2 weeks, 15 days before I had to report to San Francisco. So I actually volunteered to go to Vietnam. So I just, you got to go, you got to go.
Yeah.
And of course, the funny thing is, he actually beat me to Vietnam. Okay.
Wow.
I got overseas in late November, or in December of 67. And you're too young. You weren't even alive back in those days.
No, I'm enjoying this conversation, so go ahead.
The spy ship Pueblo got captured in January of 1968 by the North Koreans. Okay. And so they took the 9th Marine Amphibious Brigade, and we were going to go recapture the Pueblo. So I spent a couple of months in Japan, a couple of months in Okinawa, a couple of months in Japan, went a month in the Philippines, went to Taiwan, and they were trying to fake him out where we had come from. The guy that I had taken his orders, my orders came in the week after I left to go to Vietnam. So he went home on leave, and he went over there and he missed the whole thing with the Pueblo. So by the time I got in country, was already there and had been there for a month.
Wow.
And of course, that means that Navy people always say, take this when I say that was the best break I ever had in the Marine Corps, was a Navy ship getting captured. But, but
Yeah, besides that part. Yeah, I bet that's what it is. Oh,
so at any rate, I was fortunate because, again, Ted of 68, the brunt of it it started in February. And so the worst part of it, they were cleaning it up by the time I got into country.
so I mean, even a month, right? It's a month. It sounds like a month. You said, yeah, that's even just to clean it up is kind of a scene, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then they had a lot of people don't know much about the Vietnam War. There was a mini Tet in the spring when they tried it again with what they had left. And of course, we kicked their butt.
They kicked their arse again, huh? That's good.
Yep.
Hey, I'll tell you what. You were there 13 months, you said?
That's what the tour was. I only ended up spending 8 months there because of the Pueblo.
And
The 13-month tour was your overseas tour, and I ended up spending several months running around the Far East before going into Vietnam. So I was very fortunate.
yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, knock on wood, God forbid, I don't know if I'll be talking to you right now, right?
Yeah, that's
So thank God that you're here. Thank God you're get to tell a story, get to tell your story, get to tell a story to your grandkids about your daughter. So that's good. That's good. Everything works out for a reason and a purpose, Guns. And you're right here, living testimony of that. You came back. How was, I was talking to a couple of service members and mental health back in the day, and this is before my time, right? Because I came in 2010, way after you were already done, right? I mean, not way after, but just after you were done, right? And they were talking about you just either you're faking it or suck it up and keep going, because suck it up, Buttercup, because I'm here too. And there was nobody was looking at or thinking about the end state of the war or the wars, period. The shelf life, so to speak. Like, hey, what happens at the end of shelf life? You know what I mean? Do we have an after actions for it? And I don't think the military in general, let alone the Marine Corps, was prepared for the mental health aspect that we're dealing with now. And we're going back and forth, leaving it back in. But based off of your experience coming back from Vietnam, were they prepared then than they are now?
It's still not prepared. And it is worse today. Okay.
Yes.
When I went through, you see all of this PTSD, which is a real thing. But the fact is, I think the military has made it worse, because when you're in boot camp in 1966, they definitely put you in stress. But the whole point is you learn right there in boot camp that you can be stressed. You know it's not going to kill you. And you learn how to handle just the fact of stress.
And
the more stress-free boot camp got, Charlie back then or Abdullah now doesn't give a crap about what your feelings are and how much stress he's putting you through. And so you get people that are, the first stress that they get in the military is when somebody's shooting at them. And back in the day, I mean, you've been stressed for an awful lot just in boot camp and in ITR, so that you learn to handle the stress a little better. It's one of these weird things that most people have no idea about. In 68, when I came home, they didn't allow Marines to go straight from Vietnam back to the States. The Army, we got on a plane in Da Nang with Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marines, and it flew to Okinawa, and all of the Marines got off in Okinawa. And you had to go and get yourself squared away and talk to people, and they really did make some effort to find out if you really were stressed or anything, but not much. I spent 5 days in Okinawa before they would finally let me get on a plane to come home. A byproduct of that, oddly enough, because I've had this conversation with people who say, oh, you Vietnam veterans were so, terribly treated when you got home. Because it was a plane full of Marines, we landed at El Toro. And so we got off the plane in El Toro, and El Toro in those days was so big that it had its own high school. They had a high school band. They had a big banner out in front that we walked under and welcome home Marines. And they were playing patriotic songs and handing out candy and stuff. So I didn't immediately getting off the plane was the best it could have been.
Yeah.
Then they put us on buses and we went straight to LAX where they were spitting at you and shit like. But I'm 6'2", and when I came back from Vietnam, I weighed 100.
Wow.
I looked like death warmed over.
Yeah, I know. I was just like, I'm 6'3", 220 pounds. And I remember being stationed in San Diego as a drill instructor and going down to 180. I can't imagine another 40 pounds off of me. That's crazy.
Yep. Yep. But the fact is, at my size, nobody wanted to mess with me. They may have given me dirty looks, but they didn't say anything. Plus, I had a 38 in my waistband behind my belt buckle that I had carried the whole time I was in Vietnam. In those days, the jungle utilities had a bandage pocket in the right leg pocket, and that was that 38 fit perfectly in there. And everybody who'd been to Vietnam and come back that I had met before I went said, take a backup. And you didn't see any 45s around the airway. In those days, the pilots and air crews were issued a Colt Detective Special with a 2-inch barrel, which is the only thing it's good for. Studied and captured us, as far as I'm concerned. So it wasn't unusual. So that's what I bought, and that's what I carried with me the whole time I was over there.
Wow.
And I had that. Of course, 68, they didn't have metal detectors and all that crap. I was bound and determined I was going to get home.
Hell yeah. Wow, it's crazy.
Yeah. And I still have no disability thing for PTSD. Okay. They push that on you all the time is Vietnam. You can have all kinds of physical problems, which in fact I have some, that you fight them tooth and nail, but they want you to say you've got PTSD and, but
that's fascinating statement. I would say that it would be, why are they fighting you for the physical disabilities if it's right there in front of you, vice the thing you can't see, right?
Yeah. No clue.
That is fascinating to hear.
But they have a whole organization set up to deny you physical claims.
Huh.
I don't know what to tell you.
I'm about to dig into that piece later on, but that's crazy. Doesn't make any sense to me. You'd think that. Anyways, I don't know. Gotta take a pause here for a second. That doesn't make any sense. No way you look at it doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? Like,
but you got to understand the VA is two parts. The healthcare part, which can be excellent. It can be crappy, but most of the time it's pretty dang good. And then you got the compensation and pension part, which they will fight you tooth and nail if you're a Vietnam veteran. If you're a modern veteran, I taught my last career before I retired for the good was teaching in a community college, teaching automotive technology. And every semester that I taught there, I had veterans in my classes. And dang near every one of them was 100%.
huh.
And what's crazy too, and you'll find this out because you're a gunny, you're probably getting close to worried about doing all that. It's a workforce program for automotive. So the military will pay you a living expenses and your tuition and everything else for this to become an auto mechanic. But then I ran up on one who the last semester we always had them a work program where they had to have an actual job in the automotive field. And he couldn't do it because he was 100% disabled. So he's getting 100% disability. He's getting paid to go to school for a degree that he can't use.
Wow. Huh. So wait, because you were in Vietnam, they're not giving you, they're fighting you tooth and nail. And I say not giving to you. I can't, based off what you're telling me, it sounds like they're throwing punches back, like no, yes, no, yes. Is that what you're saying?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. You go there and they said, I went, people talk about war stories and people not telling war stories. And I think part of that has to do with most people, their war stories wouldn't live up to their audience's expectations. Daring do, and, Arnold Schwarzenegger running through, this M60
Yeah.
under one arm and something under the other. It was hot in Vietnam, so I always slept naked, okay? So most of the time I worked at night, but I was actually not working at night and would sleep in the daytime. And so that's about the only way you could sleep, and it's 100 plus degrees. And so I was in my rack, which I built, and we got attacked. So I grabbed my flak vest, my helmet, my weapon, and my ammunition, and ran for my fighting position. And they used pallets for sidewalks. And my foot got caught in a pallet and I broke most of my toe falling down.
Wow.
So it was under attack, and it happened to somebody not too long before that, and they gave him a Purple Heart. I mean, it's under attack and blah, blah, blah. At that time, I was about 3 weeks from coming home. And I said, I am not going to come home in a cast. And people say, oh, well, how were you wounded? Well, I was naked except for my war gear and fell down and broke my foot.
That's funny.
It is funny now, but 50 years ago, it didn't sound very. So, at any rate, I had the only real bad problem I have now is still with my foot because of it didn't heal up right because I didn't get anything done about it.
That's funny, Guns. That's wild. Look, I'll tell you what, the reason why I do it, the reason why I do this and I get to talk to, a bunch of kinfolk all over the place from 20 plus years to 30 plus years to 8 years or to 10 years, whatever have you, is that, certain people do it really well and they interview all these SOC operators, great amazing stories. But how many service members can relate? Not a lot, because it's literally less than 1% of the community, right? Even more so now. But this is great. This is funny. Right? Not that I'm making fun of you, but the story is funny. Maybe back in the day, it was probably not something you want to share because you're going to get looked at like, what the, right? How kinetic was it while you were there the entire time?
Well, for every Marine that was in the field, I remember reading this in Stars and Stripes, there were 7 doing something else. But in 50-something years since Vietnam, I've only ever met one of them. Now, I've met many recon and snipers, and I even met one that was a recon sniper from 1960, which they didn't do. I don't know about today's Marine Corps, but in those days, there was no such thing. Recon did this, snipers did that. And I actually met a guy who'd been a cook.
There you go.
But all the rest of them, all the Army people were special forces, all the Navy people were SEALs. And I mean, they only had one SEAL team back then. So I cooked, The fact is, that's one of the ways you can tell fake Marines. God knows in 50 years, I've seen a lot of them. Is that I have never met a real, honest to God, in the field grunt who was not appreciative of the air.
Yeah. That makes sense.
In the rear with the gear and all that. Well, the fact is, when you get wounded, who came and got you?
The rear.
Yeah. And when the shit hit the fan, I know the F4s, they loved them. Come out there and drop a little napalm. So the real guys, in my experience, are always ones that appreciate the fact that you served in there, that I served in there. And
I actually, funny thing, as much flack as we give each other, because I work with a bunch of 03s, 0311s, 8152s, 0369s, and the much as flack that we give each other, I think that currently, it's a mutual respect. Like, look, dog, I know what you do. I don't do it. And he goes, well, and the same vice versa. I know what you do. I ain't doing it, right? Like, it's just kind of a mutual respect thing. And back in the day, maybe not so much, but I got to ask, Guns, you were married the entire duration of your service?
No, no. Oh,
Latter end?
you're gonna love this story.
Oh, go.
Okay. Growing up, there was a retired Army general who lived next door to me. And I was 16. I was outside working on my hot rod. It was this time of year, November, December, something like that, and saw him over there digging a hole in his backyard. And today I know his wife probably called my mom, because my mom came out and said, "Why don't you go over and see what he's doing?" Well, his dog had died. And so he was out burying his dog. And so I volunteered to do it for him. And I was 16. I got pneumonia. It was probably he was an elderly man. He's probably 20 years younger than I am now. But at any rate, so next time his 4 granddaughters came to visit, he set up a date with one of his granddaughters and myself. And his wife thought I was that nice young man from next door. And so every time, as long as she lived, we always had to go back and visit that lady. Okay. And at any rate, I dated the granddaughter off and on, and she was in college, and I dropped out of college and was in the Marine Corps, and I went overseas, and she was home right while I was on leave. We kind of sort of got serious, but not really. And then we wrote back and forth while I was in Vietnam. And I got back in December 23rd of 68, and we got married in April of 69. So in one day, she went from being the daughter of a general to the wife of a corporal.
There's no better way.
That was 55 years ago.
Wow, congratulations. 55 years of
Thank you.
marriage? How do you do it?
Marine discipline.
Oh, that's good.
How do you say you're a dumb shit to a second lieutenant? I don't want to do that real.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
We get along very, very well.
Good. I mean, 55 years, you guys know basically how many hairs you have on your head left. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
That's good. Congratulations. That's an achievement in itself.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mad respect. I'm at 15.
That's good.
It's been not a long 15, but it's been definitely a roller coaster ride of 15 years, not knowing what's coming next, right? But at the same time, get to an experience with that somebody said till death do us part with. So it's pretty good so far. 5, going on 5. Going on 5. She's due in February with our fifth one girl.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Are your grandkids have kids yet?
Yep. So I'm a great grandfather.
Dude, that's awesome, Guns.
Got a little 3-year-old granddaughter that lives in the same area we do.
Isn't that a blessing?
It is, absolutely.
Well, it keeps you young because you look great.
Sometimes I feel great.
That's good. Hey, every day is one day at a time. One day at a time.
Yeah, tell your wife, if you have read my timeline, you know that when I hear from wives and parents of Marines, my answer is always the same. That's the toughest job in the Corps, is being the spouse or the parent of a Marine. And I think of my poor mom when I had just bought a car when I went to Vietnam, and I told her, sell it. I'll get another when I get back. She was just sure I was going to get killed. And she's a big woman. And it was an MG. And she drove that thing. She was a high school teacher. She drove that every day to school just so she'd have something. Of course, I fooled.
Yeah. That's good. Hey, that's a good April Fool's, right? Wow. That's crazy. It is. I agree with you. It is the hardest job to do. Our job's easy. We signed up for it, so we know day in and day out what it's going to look like. They don't. It's like, hey, we're PC, or, for the last 4 kids, the last one most recently, I got to be here 3/4 of it. And that was the first time in the 4 that I had. This is the first one, no. Second one, no. Third one, I had to leave 2/3 of the pregnancy. And then I came back for the very end of it. This last one, I got to be here for 80% of it. And it's been good. And then this 5th one, hopefully, I don't have to leave at all. And I get to experience 100% of the pregnancy, which is it's definitely a step in the right direction for me, right? But um, I can't imagine doing that and then holding down the house, paying all the bills, taking the kids to school. Just, whoa. But it's God blessed, God given ability, and that's all I could say. There's kudos to the spouses, kudos to the mothers that raise Marines, and yeah, agreed. No, there's no worse job than being a spouse or parent. Absolutely agreed. When you retired from, or when you got out as a gunnery sergeant, you got out, you were doing a like transition to attrition, correct?
Well, being in the reserve, my transition from Marine Corps to civilian life was really when I got out of active duty and went to college. And again, you wouldn't know this, but 1970, Vietnam was still going on. And while I was actually at the university, they burned a building on the campus in protest of the Vietnam War. But I was in engineering in Alabama, like a lot of colleges, the engineering buildings are all together. And it was away from all of the foo-foo-rah stuff, the English and poetry and stuff like that. And immediately on starting classes, because I had white sidewalls, and I saw another guy with white sidewalls, and he was third MARDIV. He'd been in Vietnam same time I was, came back, got married, going to school on a GI Bill, and we were fast friends. For the 2 years that it took me to get that degree, we did everything together. And you asked earlier about mental health issues. I've always felt like that was my counseling.
And
We'd sit there with a jug of wine or bottle of scotch or bottle of bourbon or whatever. He'd been an 0311, 2 Purple Hearts. He had some war stories. But again, we, sat and talked about them. And again, he had absolutely no problem with air wingers.
yeah,
He said, I just wish I could have gotten one of those jobs.
yeah, that's true. Wow. So that was your counseling. I mean, you can look back now and say that's what helped me through. A jug of wine, though, I don't think they sell jugs of wine anymore. It's kind of like 20 ounces.
That's another Vietnam. I mean, I had never been on a podcast, so I honestly didn't know if you would ask questions or want to hear stories or whatever. In Vietnam, the Air Force had a liquor store. Okay. And all of the hard liquor was sold in 40-ounce bottles. That's bigger than a fifth.
Yeah.
And there's a big sign, and I wish I had had a sense of history, a better sense of history, because they had taken a picture. They had a big sign over the door that said, nobody under 21 are Marines allowed. Marines were not allowed to have hard liquor. Okay. You could have 2 beers a day, and that was it. And when I say that I didn't have a sense of history, actually hanging around here on the wall, at least the air wing in the Marine Corps always went with the plan of the day. You got the plan of the day, who's the OD and SDO and all that sort of stuff. But they'd always have some words of wisdom, And there were 2 times in Vietnam where I read that and said, I am going to keep this.
Yeah.
Okay? One was telling people to quit getting on top of the bunkers and watching rocket attack. They taking some casualties. One hit on the rocket hit on top of a bunker and killed a bunch of people. But I mean, the rockets red glare, it was a pretty spectacular when those 122 millimeter rockets came flying over, and big boom. And the other was on the evils of marijuana, as only a Marine lieutenant could write.
Wow.
I didn't do dope then. I don't do dope now, but it just was funny the way that they were trying to convince you not to smoke marijuana.
Well, I mean, that's gonna be hard to do, not to watch a good fireworks show and then to ease the pain. Focus on the boat. I don't know. That's gonna be hard to do. Quite a combination though, doing both at the same time. I don't know.
Yep.
Look, you look back at your service. Obviously, you did it honorably. Obviously, you look back at your service. You can't regret anything. right? Because then you wouldn't have the things you do, or things would have changed tremendously for you if you regretted one decision. So I know there's no regret for you, not at this point. But when you look back at your service, what's the biggest takeaway out of the 18 years? The good positive, and then we'll talk about the negative here in a second.
Well, the main thing is I was a pretty rotten kid. I mean, I just was not well disciplined. I didn't brush my teeth growing up, didn't make my bed. Okay. My wife and I were talking about that as we were coming back from Arizona. You know, my drill instructor taught me to brush my teeth. My drill instructor taught me to make my bed. Okay. And so the Marine Corps fundamentally changed my life. And then from a technical standpoint, I was fortunate enough to get good technical training, which built a career that, you know, I've lived comfortably for an awful long time because of what I learned in Navy schools in the Marine Corps.
Right.
That's the good. I mean, it really has.
Yeah, fundamentally changed you, right? You said earlier, discipline things you'd never had. You know what? You should probably talk to my 13-year-old son. I tell him every day, I was like, you're going to join the service. I don't care what service you join, but you're going to join one. And it's going to do something for you. It's going to fundamentally change you because you're not that he's a good kid, very good kid, just, bored.
My dad was a Marine. He always said his only claim to fame was he was a PFC when Chesty Puller was a private.
That's wild.
Yeah. Second Nicaraguan campaign.
Small world. My goodness. That's crazy. Now I can truly say I know somebody that knew Chesty.
There you go. So they did serve together.
Wow. That's crazy. Man, oh man. Back nice. 13-year-old son. And I'll tell you what, fundamentally changed you. Brush your teeth. My goodness. You know how hard it is to get a boy to get on the straight and narrow. I can't imagine. I mean, I don't know how I was. I don't remember how I was a teenager, but I'm sure it was probably similar to what he was doing. But yeah, fundamentally changed you, gave you discipline, technical expertise, and experience. And you said, I mean, mic drop, guns. Like, there's nothing else really to say. Everything that you have now sounds like it's because it's rooted back to the Marine Corps.
Absolutely.
What's 18 years of honorable service, good roots, good foundation for you and your family. But I know there's one big negative takeaway. There has to be one thing that stands out to you. Out of 18 years, what do you remember that you don't want to do or you didn't do because of it?
I'd say because you're in the Marine Corps now, but I got screwed by the Marine Corps more than one time. And I wake up at night sometimes thinking about that. It still pisses me off 50 years after it happened.
You can be specific if you want. I mean, you're at this point, I would love to know the story.
Well, I can say, unfortunately, it's several stories. But the last one, like the warrant officer, okay?
Oh, I see.
I'm a computer guy, and I got this unit computerized and in good shape. And there were only 3 enlisted people in there. It was all officers. The last summer camp I went to was at Coronado, and I was the only enlisted person in the whole thing. There were bird colonels, slews of lieutenant colonels, majors out the wazoo. I worked directly for a full colonel. Okay. He wrote up you've seen the warrant officer application thing, filled it up with stuff I had done for this unit. Okay. Recommends with highest enthusiasm. It's as good as it gets. And I had a sergeant friend of mine who was in S1 with you know how the reserve work with the I&I staff?
Mm-hmm.
And the I&I staff had a female Marine that they were putting in for warrant officer. And of course, there are only so many slots. So he said, you need to come up here, Gunny, and take a look at this paperwork. And what had because it had went from the unit to the I&I to the headquarters Marine. And so this package that had a whole page written by a full colonel was one line. His OIC thinks highly of him, completely negating the fact that my OIC was a colonel, and recommends with confidence, which is as bad as it gets. So the WM got warrant officer. I didn't, and I retired.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you could,
I still have all of that paperwork sitting right here in a file drawer.
I'm sorry that I had to bring that up.
That's okay.
But look, like I said earlier, I mean, everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for its purpose. We're not in control of a lot of those outcomes, right? But look at you
Yep.
now.
Yep.
Look at you now. Two grandkids, right? Two, you said?
Two.
And then,
Yep.
and then a great grandbaby.
Great grandbaby. Yep.
You know what I mean? Like if you would have got selected, what would that look like?
I think I probably would have still stayed in that same unit and I don't think that would have, that's the part of why it doesn't bother me more than it does, is because I would have stayed in and gotten a retirement. So I'd have had a little more spending money to probably with a real retirement, but it doesn't really.
Yeah. I mean, I get to talk to you either way, and I get to learn from your experience. Have you ever asked your wife the toughest point in your military career? Like, what was so tough about it for her?
Well, she grew up. She was an Army brat. Okay, she grew up around the Army.
That's right.
When I told you about her grandmother introducing us, her grandmother, grandfather was a general. Her husband was a general. Her grandfather, her father were generals. Her husband was a general, and two of her three sons became generals.
Wow.
Only one made it to colonel. And so she knows what the military's like. They go back at West Point to 1840.
What the?
Yeah.
My goodness.
So, yeah.
That's lineage for sure.
Yep.
She knew it. She knew what it was. That's good. That's good.
Yep.
She could support you in that way. That's awesome.
Yep.
You know, you said earlier about PTSD, mental health, and for some reason, like you said, you're trying to figure out why it's more prevalent now. And I think, one of the catalysts is purpose. We're mission oriented. We're task oriented as enlisted. I mean, just in general, service member. And we struggle with mental health now. We're losing battles and wars here with service members in that way than we were losing them during the last 20 years of war, right? With Afghanistan and Iraq. Give them a tool for their toolbox, the ones struggling right now and considering taking that 30-inch step the wrong way, right? Give them some insight. What helped you during your tour, during your experience in the Marine Corps, and give them some insight there, Guns.
Well, I wish that they would teach this to people. I learned it on my own. Okay. And I have had problems. And whenever I think I have a problem, I think of Leslie Ayres, Jerry Woods, John LaVue, Robert Holt, Morgan Weed. Okay. All of them are dead in 1968. Leslie Ayres, you never saw him without a smile on his face. You can look him up on the internet and you'll find a picture of him at Khe Sanh sitting in a fighting hole, turned around looking at the camera, smiling. Okay. But he got killed, and I didn't. I know survivor's guilt is a problem for people. I think that's what broadly gets put under the umbrella of PTSD really has a lot more to do with the suicides with survivor's guilt. Because I'm still alive and they aren't. Well, I took a different attitude 50 years ago. I said, when I feel down, I'm going to stop being me and I'm going to be Leslie Ayres. And I'm going to put a smile on my face, just like he had every time I ever saw him. He had a smile on his face. Okay. And if I get down as Leslie, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to be Jerry Wood. Jerry Wood didn't even get a Purple Heart. He got killed when the truck turned over. But he's still dead. So I wish that they would try to talk to these young people and say, look, if you decide that your life is not worth living, how about living a life for this person who died? That's my spiel.
Simple, short, passion. There's emotion there. I could feel it. It's like you're reaching across the screen and giving me a hug here and telling me about it. Wow. That's pretty deep, Guns. I mean, if you're just tuning in, got Gunny Williams on the horn. Talk about mental health. Look, I'm gonna leave the floor to you for the last couple seconds, couple minutes. Any last save rounds, guns, whatever you want to share. That was deep. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. The floor is yours for any last save rounds. Again, I do appreciate you coming on and sharing your story, sharing your experience, sharing your adversity and resilience. The floor is yours. Hit it.
Well, I've said most of it. I didn't know how this would go. I didn't know if you were going to ask questions or whatever. I actually made a list of incidents that happened during those times to talk about if I ended up having to do that. But the way it went, I didn't ever actually have to refer to that, which is good because it's a list on my phone. And so I would have to try to maneuver away from this and onto that and back again. And that might be beyond my technical capability.
Well, if you
know, I
go ahead.
I do Twitter and I've got pictures. I put a picture of my old jungle boots on there. I put a picture of my Ho Chi Minh sandals on there. And, I try to do things, some political stuff. I did say today that somebody was talking about Richard Blumenthal. And I said in answer to them, I think Donald Trump ought to appoint him to be the ambassador to Vietnam so he could finally actually go. And I got a lot of response from them. And then I started thinking about it and I said, I forgot. And why doesn't he take Jane Fonda over there with him to introduce him to her friend? And so somebody commented on that. And so I actually, as old as I am, I'm 79 years old. I actually made a meme. I went online and got a headstone and actually put in there, Jane Fonda, the bitch of Vietnam, rest in piss.
Boy.
So that was the last thing. That's the last thing I posted this morning.
I did see that. I did see some of it. I think I seen one of them. I don't know if I see the whole thing, but I seen one of them. Actually, let me ask you. You said you were fixing up the man cave, huh? You got all that memorabilia, huh?
Yeah.
So what's the most near and dear to your heart? Besides all of it.
Well, all of it. Yeah. The one right behind me, the Marine Corps emblem, because I could take the camera and show you. It says First H&S 1st Battalion, 23rd Marine of the Year, a Marine's Marine.
Priceless.
Yep.
Wow. If you have a will out there, I'll take that. If God forbid, just put it on there. I mean, give it to Gunny Garcia. I want to be able to tell your story, a Marine's Marine. You know what I'm saying? That's good. That's good. The only thing remotely close to that I have in the short time is I got when I was in San Diego, I got the Dan Daly Award.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. It was for the hardest working drill instructor in the company at the time, which is pretty cool. Yeah, it was pretty cool. Regardless, look, I know you. I know a lot of people. It was good to talk to you, Guns. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. You got a lot of things going on. Retirement looks great on you.
Thank you.
I can't wait to be there. 55 years of marriage, amazing. I can't wait to be there. I mean, you got a lot of things to live. You got a lot to live up to. I have a lot to live up to, and then kind of sharing your legacy, sharing your story. So I do appreciate you coming on, and taking the time. Yeah, it was my pleasure, truly. And ladies and gentlemen, this is Pit Talk, Pulling Pits and Opinions with your host, Gunny G and Gunny Williams, where service members help service members, period. Follow, like, subscribe everywhere you get your podcast and on most social media platforms. Let us know how we're doing. Any criticism is good criticism. Again, thanks, Guns, for taking the time and sharing your story, your experience. I would love to have you on again. If you want to share anything else, if anything comes like this, let me know. I'm all about it. And no story is too small or too big. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is me and Guns. We out.
Thank you.
See you later, guys.
Right.
Pit Talk is a podcast
podcast featuring active service members to discuss their thoughts and opinions on various issues surrounding military life, current events, and history. The statements heard here are the opinions of its members and guests. These do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense and are not endorsed or sponsored in any way. Listener, viewer discretion advised.